Okay. So we have a very special guest with us today. We have Dr. Xanator Ajaman Rawlings, who is a medical doctor and also a member of parliament here in Accra. And she has very generously given us some of her time today to address us about some of the work that her team is doing around air quality and solutions for air quality here today. So, Dr. Xanator, if you're ready, you may come up and let's please give her a warm welcome.
Thank you so very much, and good morning. I'm sorry I'm going to have to go through this very quickly because I have to attend a national security dialogue in 40 minutes. So I'm going to have to go through it quite quickly. To start with, just a few things. It's great to be here. This is not our first meeting, and this is just to highlight some of the things that we're doing to connect the dots in terms of what the science is saying and how we're applying it to the communities that we live in. My name is Xanator Ajaman Rawlings. I'm a medical doctor by profession. I have a master's in conflict, peace, and security, but I find myself in politics at the moment. So if we could just, let's see, how does this go? Yeah, very quickly. We had a project that we did in the Osunite market, which was based on the triple helix model on innovation, which we've now moved to the quadruple helix, which is about the universities, universities, industry, government, and community. It's about tying the whatever innovations are being brought about in academia, and then bringing this into the letting industry be a part of it. But at the heart of it is community, because if the community doesn't understand the science and how to apply to make their lives better, it makes it very difficult to actually have that kind of full stakeholder engagement. And the initial one, which was done in the Osunite market, it's still there today, was to change the stoves over there. So we retrofitted the stoves there from the artisanal ones that we're using, which were causing a lot of pollution, particulate matter, and of course the carbon monoxide emissions. And it was in a semi-enclosed area, which meant that the women were actually going to hospitals with what appeared to be smoking-related disease. Doctors were asking them if they were smokers when they were actually not smokers. What was happening was the exposure to the smoke. Now, what the idea behind this was to make the concept of carbon footprint and reducing carbon emissions tangible to the ladies in the community. This here is Accra High School, which is the latest one that we've done in terms of the changing of stoves. With Accra High School, it was recently given the approval to become a boarding school. This is what they were using to cook before we actually changed the stoves. We will share a link with you which shows you the trend in the carbon emissions since we installed the sensor, which is it's a I think solar paneled emission sensor, so that we don't have to keep worrying about whether it's going to work or not. Now these are the new stoves that they're using, and this is based on. Okay, so here we have the current. This is actually live. This is a reading live. What's happening here is we used to have the sensor in the purple and the very dark red, which is the very unhealthy and hazardous. However, what's happening now is the behavior change of the women is lagging behind the change of the stoves, even though we did the initial stakeholder engagement and we've been engaging them and we've been in touch with the headmistress about not letting them use the old stoves. What's happening is the behavior change is still lagging. So they're using the new stoves, which if they were only using, the sensor should be in the yellow, worst case in the orange, but they are still using those on the blind side of the administration, which is why we're seeing a higher than normal reading over there. So some of those stoves that you saw at the very beginning, the women are still using intermittently. So what will happen is as the day progresses, you'll notice that the sensor readings will change because of what they're doing with the stoves in the kitchen area. Of course, you're welcome to go and visit so you can see what's happening there. You're also welcome to go to the Osunite market to see what is happening there with the women, speak to them, understand what the situation is, what their lives are like now versus before. The idea was to make it more profitable to be more caring to the environment. If people only understand that we're just decreasing the footprint, carbon footprint, without understanding how they benefit from it, sometimes it's difficult to incentivize those who are really struggling, because otherwise it's an abstract concept that is great for people who don't have to worry about their daily bread. But if you're worrying about your daily bread, the last thing you're thinking about is how your behavior is impacting the, carbon emissions globally, or at least in your community. If we could just go back to the poster, please, the poster. While we're going there, just to say that in spite of the fact that we are really working so hard to try and look at our emissions, it's important to remember that Africa is only contributing less than 4% of global carbon emissions, which means that even though we're probably the smallest contributor, we're also the worst hit. So as much as we're talking about all this and looking at how we change our lifestyles and technology, we must also be mindful not to push our most vulnerable into greater poverty as we try to stand alongside the standards of those who are polluting more than the rest of us. I mean, if you look at the top 5 global CO2 emissions globally, China, USA, India, Russia, Japan, that's already, and still Africa is not featured anywhere. Still no African country has been mentioned. That tells you that we really still have a lot of room to wriggle around, to figure out what works for us without necessarily doing a cut and paste scenario where we are picking on technology that may not necessarily work for us, that may make some of our poorest even more so, without looking at how we can actually adapt things to our own scenario, our situation here. I'm not quite sure how to use the pointer. So if you could zoom in on the schematics under methodology, please. Is it possible to zoom in a bit, please? Anyway, I will leave this for you here. Okay, now over here we have now if you can scroll up slightly. Thank you very much. Okay, if you look up here, you can see the drawings for what we have are the fish smokers and the stoves. What we're being shown here is a system that is supposed to be more efficient. And the more efficient the burning is, the less likely you are to produce particulate matter. And what happens as a result of all of this is a more efficient chamber is also ensuring that the food is cooking a lot quicker. The women are using less fuel. A lot less heat is being generated in the immediate vicinity of the stoves. And these stoves are actually fabricated on site. This is technology that's developed here. There's an example of the stoves here. Those are the cook stoves, and those there are the fish smokers. The other thing as well is because of the means by which it's being done, we have less of the polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons being put on the food, which means that your food is not being covered with all sorts of pollutants as well. Now, if you can scroll to the right so that we can see the table. What we did was, in order to show that scientifically the stoves that we were doing for the women made sense, we had to make sure we had data. And so over here, you have the data of what the emissions were like before the setting of the stoves and afterwards. So before the intervention, if you look at the particulate matter, we have here 12,554. And then after the intervention, we have 3,998. That is the extent of decrease of particulate matter. And then if you look up on the carbon monoxide in ppms, the total was 59.8, and then the total at the end of the intervention was 23. The science speaks for itself. So we didn't have to guess as to whether or not the intervention made a difference. We actually have the values over there. The averages tell you the story. We're doing less than half at the end with the averages with the particulate matter as well. So the idea of the census makes a lot of sense. If you don't have something that's measuring your emissions before any intervention, it's difficult to make a case for what you're doing scientifically. And that's why these censuses make a lot of sense. And we have these also set up in the Accra High School. Initially, the idea was just to see what's happening in the school. And then we thought, why don't we do this around the kitchen area? Let's see whether we can measure what's happening before and after. The results are quite dramatic, and I think it really makes a case for how we can do little things that make a huge difference. And in doing these particular cook stoves in places like the kitchens, in the public areas, and also in the schools, what we're looking to do is to, in the minds of the young students, for example, let them appreciate the fact that there are other career opportunities, there are other career paths with regards to the environment that they can look at. When they can see how understanding this data connects to just something as simple as the food that ends up on their table, they start questioning what can they do differently? How can they be a part of that change? And what are the options as far as career is concerned to make sure that they can actually be doing this and better? And so the idea is not just to make a change to the environment, but to change the way people see what they can do in terms of the environmental impact of our actions. The other thing as well that I would just like to mention just in passing is, as we look at the idea of renewable energy, we have to also look at the fact that the world has still not seen the extent of the waste and the fallout from the use of renewable energy because we are not using it so much. So as we work towards the concept of let's move towards renewable energy, we must also look at how do we make sure we don't become inundated with the waste and the byproducts of renewable forms of energy that we may then not be able to handle. So perhaps preemptively, as we're looking at different forms of renewable energy, we should also look at what are the problems that we envisage as a result of creating solar panels. What do we do with the cells when they're done with? What do we do with the panels when they don't work anymore? And all of those things. So we don't end up becoming a dumping site like the way it's been over the last decade and more when it comes to e-waste, because then we end up with another problem that we can't solve, which is a compounded situation where in trying to solve one issue, you end up with many others. I'm just throwing these out there, hoping that perhaps we can have further conversations about how we don't create further problems as we are resolving some of the ones that we are faced with. I think perhaps I should end it right here and then take a couple of questions and then beg my leave. Thank you.
Loved your presentation, but I was curious about what the women were saying about why they went back to their original cooking methods.
Yes, the reason they gave was that sometimes they just want to make a small pot of stew and the stoves are so big, and so they wanted to have that option. So it means that now what we're forced to do is actually have there's a smaller version of the stove, which is actually fabricated with metal, but it's just as efficient. And so we're really just going to have to provide them with that because it's become an issue of convenience. And when it comes to convenience, it's very difficult to change behavior unless you can provide that alternative. So that was the reason they gave.